The world just crossed a line most people never thought they'd see. And before you blink, history may lock in a direction none of us can reverse. The supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is dead, and the silence that follows is louder than any missile strike. This isn't just another headline. This is a power vacuum in one of the most volatile regions on Earth, a moment where empires either recalibrate or explode. For decades, one man stood at the center of Iran's identity, ideology, and iron grip on power, shaping its enemies, its allies, and its sense of destiny. Now he's gone. And here's the uncomfortable truth most commentators won't say out loud. This isn't about mourning or revenge alone, it's about survival. When a system built around one figure suddenly loses its core, it faces a brutal choice: bend to pressure and negotiate from weakness, or strike back hard to prove it's still feared. That tension is where we are right now. On one side, a nation exhausted by sanctions, isolation, and internal strain. On the other, a regime that knows restraint can look like surrender. This is the psychological crossroads: fear versus pride, calculation versus rage. And history shows us that wounded powers rarely choose the quiet path. My bold take? Iran is unlikely to simply fold, but revenge doesn't always look like all-out war. Sometimes it's slow, asymmetric, and far more dangerous because it stretches conflict over years, not days. And that's why this moment matters to you, even if you live thousands of miles away. Because when deterrence breaks, the shockwaves hit markets, borders, and lives everywhere. If this analysis made you pause, even for a second, like to push this conversation further, subscribe to the channel if you want clear, no-nonsense geopolitical breakdowns without the noise. And now I want to hear from you. Type the word peace in the comments. If you believe the world still has a chance to step back from the edge, tell us which country you're watching from and what time it is right now in your country. Because this moment is global, unfolding in real time, and your voice is part of the story being written. For more than 3 decades, one man stood at the center of Iran's power structure: Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. To understand why his death changes everything, you have to understand how completely he shaped the system. He wasn't just a religious authority. He wasn't just a political figure. He was the axis around which the entire Islamic Republic rotated. Since 1989, after succeeding Ruhollah Khomeini, Khamenei consolidated authority in ways few leaders in the modern Middle East ever achieved. Presidents came and went, parliaments shifted, public moods fluctuated. But one office remained untouchable: the supreme leader. Under his watch, Iran's political system evolved into a tightly controlled hierarchy. Elections existed, but only within boundaries defined by institutions loyal to him. Reformists could run until they crossed invisible red lines. The Guardian Council filtered candidates. The judiciary enforced ideological discipline. The intelligence services monitored dissent. Every lever ultimately traced back to one center of gravity. But perhaps his most consequential move was elevating the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, known as the IRGC, from a revolutionary militia into a political, military, and economic superpower. Over time, the IRGC became more than an armed force. It became a state within a state. It controlled vast industries, commanded elite military units, directed foreign proxy networks, and shaped regional strategy from Iraq to Lebanon. Khamenei relied on them, and in return, they became the guardians of his vision. Regionally, he positioned Iran not as a conventional power, but as the leader of a resistance axis against the United States and Israel. Through proxy groups and strategic partnerships, Iran projected influence without direct confrontation. This doctrine of strategic patience allowed Tehran to push boundaries while avoiding full-scale war. It was calculated, controlled, centralized. Inside the country, repression hardened during moments of unrest. From the Green Movement protests in 2009 to more recent demonstrations, dissent was tolerated only briefly before security forces restored order. The message was clear: stability would be preserved at all costs. And here's the key tension: this entire architecture was deeply personalized. Institutions existed, yes, but loyalty flowed upward. Strategic decisions funneled through one office. When you centralize power that tightly for 30-plus years, you create strength, but also fragility. Remove the keystone, and the structure trembles. That is why Khamenei's death isn't symbolic. It's structural. Iran wasn't just governed under him, it was calibrated around him. The question now isn't simply who replaces him. It's whether the system he engineered can function without the man who held its competing factions together. When power is that concentrated, succession is never smooth. It's seismic. And in geopolitics, seismic shifts rarely happen quietly. When news broke of Khamenei's death, Iran didn't respond with one unified emotion. It split. And that split tells you everything about the road ahead. In some cities, mourning ceremonies filled the streets. Black banners hung from government buildings. State television replayed decades of speeches. Clerics called him the guardian of the revolution. The imagery was deliberate: continuity, unity, strength. But in other neighborhoods, behind closed doors and sometimes in public squares, reactions were more complicated. Whispers turned into cautious celebrations. Social media flickered with messages of relief. The contrast was striking, grief and defiance existing side by side. Constitutionally, the system moved quickly. An interim leadership mechanism, often described as an emergency council, was activated to prevent a vacuum. The goal was clear: signal stability, project control. But beneath that surface, calm lies an uncomfortable truth. There is no successor with Khamenei's combination of authority, longevity, and religious stature. No one commands automatic loyalty across all factions. This creates opportunity and risk. Opposition voices may sense a window opening. Protests could intensify, fueled by years of economic strain and political frustration. When a centralized leader disappears, suppressed tensions often rise. The question is whether they remain contained or spill into something larger. Meanwhile, the government response has been immediate and forceful. Senior officials declared that avenging his death is not optional. It is a duty. Hardline figures have framed the moment as existential, portraying external enemies as responsible and warning against internal weakness. This rhetoric matters. It shapes the psychology of decision-making. The IRGC's role now becomes critical. As the most organized and powerful institution in the country, it may move to solidify control, ensuring continuity even if political leadership remains uncertain. In moments like this, militarized governance can become more pronounced. When leaders fear instability, they lean on the most disciplined force available. Here's the tension. The state wants to appear unshaken, but the very speed of its reaction reveals anxiety. If confidence were absolute, there would be less urgency to demonstrate it. History shows that sudden leadership loss can either unify a nation or fracture it. The coming weeks are not just about ceremonies or statements. They are about who consolidates influence behind closed doors, who commands loyalty, who shapes the narrative. Because power vacuums don't stay empty for long, and they get filled by force, by consensus, or by chaos. The word surrender sounds dramatic, emotional, almost humiliating. But in geopolitics, surrender rarely looks like waving a white flag. It looks like recalibration. If Iran chose restraint, it might agree to de-escalate tensions, pursue negotiations, or freeze retaliatory plans in exchange for economic relief or diplomatic guarantees. Ceasefires, back-channel talks, strategic pauses. These are not admissions of defeat. They are tactical decisions made when leadership calculates that survival requires flexibility. Internal instability could also push Iran toward compromise. If unrest spreads and economic pressure intensifies, the priority may shift from revenge to preservation. Governments facing domestic vulnerability often avoid external escalation because war amplifies instability. Another possibility is reform from within. If public pressure grows, leaders may introduce limited concessions to diffuse anger, loosening restrictions, adjusting foreign policy posture, seeking reintegration into global markets. Reform does not mean revolution, but it signals change. External actors could attempt to influence this direction. Offers of sanctions relief or diplomatic engagement might be presented as incentives for de-escalation. Leaders like Donald Trump in the past have combined pressure with negotiation rhetoric, creating openings, however narrow, for deal-making. But here's the bold question. Is restraint psychologically feasible right now? After losing a supreme leader under violent circumstances, would choosing negotiation be interpreted internally as weakness? In systems built on resistance narratives, backing down can undermine legitimacy. And yet, survival sometimes demands swallowing pride. Nations don't operate purely on emotion. They operate on calculation. If escalation risks catastrophic consequences, restraint may quietly become the rational choice. The tension lies between ideology and pragmatism, pride versus preservation, rage versus strategy. Surrender in this context wouldn't be collapse. It would be controlled retreat. The real uncertainty is whether the current moment allows space for that calculation, or whether emotions overpower strategy before cooler heads prevail. Revenge, unlike surrender, is emotionally intuitive. It satisfies outrage, it restores pride, it signals strength. But it also carries enormous risk. Retaliation could take many forms. Direct missile strikes against foreign bases, cyber operations targeting infrastructure, maritime disruptions in strategic waterways. These actions would send a clear message. Iran remains capable and willing to respond. Another pathway is indirect escalation. Proxy groups across the Middle East could intensify operations, allowing Tehran to retaliate while maintaining plausible deniability. This model has defined Iranian strategy for years, project power without triggering full-scale war. The IRGC may play a decisive role here. Commanders operating under a sense of ideological duty could push for bold action, especially if they believe hesitation invites further attacks. When leadership transitions are uncertain, military actors sometimes assert themselves to shape outcomes. Official statements have already framed retaliation as a legitimate right. That framing matters. It prepares public opinion. It narrows the political space for compromise. But here's the dangerous scenario. When a nation feels cornered, it may escalate, not because it wants war, but because it fears appearing weak more than it fears conflict. Escalation can become a demonstration of survival. The risk is miscalculation. One strike invites another. One retaliation triggers escalation spirals. What begins as controlled revenge can quickly slip beyond control. And yet, for a system built on resistance, doing nothing could feel more destabilizing than acting. Revenge offers emotional closure, but geopolitically, it opens doors that are difficult to shut. So what happens next? There are 4 plausible pathways, and none are simple. First, continued escalation. Iran retaliates aggressively. Regional tensions surge, and the risk of broader conflict increases. This path satisfies calls for revenge, but raises stakes dramatically. Military analysts often warn that escalation cycles are easier to start than stop. Second, internal fracture. Without Khamenei's unifying authority, factions compete. Political elites, clerical authorities, and military leaders maneuver for dominance. Instability grows, not necessarily collapse, but prolonged uncertainty. Third, populist uprising. Public frustration could evolve into organized political momentum. While revolutions are rare and unpredictable, leadership transitions create moments where previously suppressed movements gain visibility. Fourth, a Cold War stalemate. No dramatic escalation, no immediate reform. Instead, simmering tension, controlled retaliation, strategic patience. The system adapts and survives, altered but intact. My bold opinion? The most likely outcome is not dramatic surrender or immediate regional war. It is a tense, prolonged recalibration, an unstable equilibrium where Iran tests limits carefully while consolidating leadership internally. History shows that states built around strong, centralized authority rarely implode overnight. They adjust, they consolidate, they endure. But here's the lingering uncertainty, the psychological dimension. Decisions in moments like this are not made in calm rooms detached from emotion. They are made under pressure, pride, fear, and legacy. And when legacy meets uncertainty, the future becomes volatile. History doesn't warn you before it turns the page. It just does. And right now, we are standing in that exact moment. The death of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei is not just the end of a leader. It's the end of an era that defined Iran for more than 3 decades. The real question isn't whether Iran feels anger. It does. The real question isn't whether pressure is mounting. It is. The question that will shape the next decade is far more dangerous. Does Iran choose survival through restraint or strength through retaliation? Here's my bold opinion. The world is focusing too much on missiles and not enough on psychology. Nations don't just react with weapons. They react with identity. And when a country built on resistance loses its central symbol of authority, every move becomes about proving it still stands. That's the tension. If Iran escalates, it risks regional war. If it restrains itself, hardliners may call it weakness. It's a strategic chessboard where every move has consequences, and every delay sends a message. But here's the contrast that should keep you thinking tonight. Surrender doesn't mean collapse, and revenge doesn't always mean victory. Sometimes restraint is strength, sometimes retaliation is desperation, and sometimes the most powerful move is the one no one expects. The next weeks will reveal whether institutions are stronger than individuals, whether the system can function without the man who held it together for 30+ years, and whether emotion overrides calculation. This is no longer just about Iran. It's about regional stability, global markets, alliances, energy flows, and the fragile balance that keeps major powers from crossing irreversible lines. So now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Iran will escalate to prove dominance, or recalibrate to preserve survival? Is the world heading toward confrontation, or a tense but controlled standoff? If this breakdown gave you clarity, if it made you question the headlines and think deeper about what's really unfolding, hit the like button so more people can see this perspective. Subscribe right now if you want analysis that cuts through propaganda and emotional noise, because the next chapter of this story will unfold fast, and you don't want to miss it. And I want to make this global. Go down to the comments and type the word peace if you believe the world can step back from the edge. Then tell me, which country are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? Because while leaders calculate their next move behind closed doors, the rest of us are watching in real time, across time zones, across borders, connected by uncertainty. This moment could fade into controlled tension, or it could ignite something much bigger. The difference will be decided by choices made in silence, far from cameras. Stay informed, stay critical, and stay ready, because history is moving again.